It's good to be with you all. My name is Corey Weathers. I have the privilege of serving as one of the leads for all things developer relations for Auth0 by Okta. And
I am Anna, and I am also a lead for developer relations for Auth0 by Okta. You're saying, wait, what? 2 leads for developer relations? Why that? Well, you know, the globe is a pretty big place, so we've actually had to divide the two. I have the privilege of serving all things EMEA and APAC, so anything that goes from Europe all the way over to Australia is my territory.
yeah, and I allegedly have all things North and South America. I say allegedly because Anna and I have continued to make bets that at a certain point, Okta is going to disappear us and we will no longer exist within Slack. We'll see what happens when that change happens. But for now, my team continues to be excited about serving developers in and around those countries. So developer relations, the way that I define DevRel is it is about defining a series of tactics, strategies, solutions to literally build relationships with developers. There are folks who do it on behalf of companies, right? And so they try to get developers excited about their company's technology. There are folks who do it on behalf of technologies. So like you all who come to things like meetups and you say, hey, I'm really super interested in this thing that is all things JavaScript, and then championing that with other developers. And then there are folks who do it truly just because of their passion of technology. So whether it's being at a meetup or writing a piece of blog content or doing interesting things on YouTube and TikTok and things of the such, all of that encompasses developer relations. That's how I think about it.
I'm going to M+1 that. So for me, developer relations is all of what Corey said, but also it's all about educating, right? We want to educate developers. We want to be in the community. We want to help. We want to make sure that we are serving you the best way that we possibly can. And whether that be through videos or articles or just being here and speaking to you and being like, hey, like, what do you think about Auth0? Like, what can we improve? And then we're going to take that feedback and give it to the product team so that you can have the best experience that we can possibly provide. So I think a big portion of our job is actually educating, but also listening, right? And listening to you all.
Yeah. A day in the life, all things DevRel. It is different every day, which is kind of weird. The way that I think about it is I typically would start my day asking like, all right, like what's a thing that I set out to do this week or this month, whether it's build a talk, explore some new technology, troubleshoot a problem that a developer reached out to me about, catch up on things happening in the community. Because there's times where like I'll get like newsletter updates, which actually happened earlier this week, where I woke up in the middle of the night and I was like, oh, this is interesting. And I started reading it. And so I typically start my day super like, oh, this is interesting in the world of the community that I serve. Let me go dig a little bit more deeply into it. Then there are times where like roughly around midway through the day, because we do this on behalf of all things Okta, I'm talking to other folks on the team. And so it's figuring out what other folks are doing, figuring out if there's stuff that they're doing that I can either help them with or steal from them, because I'm like, oh, that's a good idea. Let me go try that with these developers. Or truly just spending time bonding with the other folks on the team, because our team is geographically dispersed. And so getting that FaceTime relationships, like all of those conversations, whether it be in Zoom or in coffee chats, that's a thing. And then in the afternoons, I tend to think of like, well, what is it that I could be doing locally? So if I spend the morning digging into code and I spend some of that time connecting with my peers, then the rest of it is how am I connecting with other developers? And so you could be doing coffee chats. You could be doing stuff like a meetup and prepping to be there. And yes, we get paid to be here, which is nice. Or you could be doing things where you're just getting together and pair programming. Because I've done that before as well in Barnes & Noble, in the bookstore, and for a couple hours, and it's super successful. But it is, sort of to Anna's point, it is all about like, how am I educating other developers, educating myself, and we are mutually helping each other succeed.
Yeah. Unlike Corey, I don't wake up in the middle of the night and read a newsletter. And I do need to use a mic. But I think every day is different.
Yeah.
There's no 2 days the same, which for some people can be frustrating. For me, I love it because it's a challenge and it never gets boring. And you have to wear many different hats, whether it's communication skills, because you're going to give a talk, whether it's coding, like you want to try out a new technology, like Corey was saying, whether it's building a strategy, because everything that you do, if you do it on behalf of a company, has to have a purpose and an intent. You have to show the impact that you're driving through the thing that you're doing. Whether it's managing your own budget, because we do travel, we spend a lot of money sometimes, and why are we spending that money? You have to justify the things you're doing. Or maybe you're doing a trip report because you just did a trip and you're talking about like the impact you had there. There is a lot of different skill sets that you need to be a developer advocate. So yes, there's the technical aspect, but there's so much more to it.
Yeah.
I would say it depends a lot on the company.
Yeah.
With our company right now, we have just created a very strong relationship with like the SDK team, in which we are becoming core collaborators with them so that we can have a direct impact. It doesn't matter. But it also depends on the advocate. We have advocates that love to code and want to spend 70% of their time coding. And we have advocates who prefer to do more other things like strategy or be more on live streams where they're just like live coding rather than building demos and production things.
Yeah.
It really depends on the passion of the advocate and how much time they want to dedicate. With the SDK team, they define the roadmap, right? They define what's coming out, what's not, and then we, depending on our expertise, can plug into that. So we're trying to become more core collaborators in that agreement.
Would you consider that your role is like a bit like R&D role?
It could be. I mean, the thing about
Part of it, yeah.
the thing about advocacy is like we have two sides where we advocate on behalf of the developers who are building with the product on a day-to-day, and then we advocate on behalf of the company who are building, you know, for those developers. And so part of our job is to inspire developers, and there's some R&D stuff happens because we're trying to build things to like get you all excited and surprised and delighted by what we're building. And then the other side to it is like, and sometimes we don't nail that. And so developers who are incredibly opinionated will tell you, I didn't like this thing, and we have to go play with it and figure out why and what we would like that experience to be. And so there can be times where we do some R&D in the sense of like, how can I help make the experience better on both sides? That's what I'd say.
Also, one interesting question might be, like, how much traveling do you do?
Varies.
It depends.
Yeah. This is terrible. We're like lawyers. But it really does vary.
But I imagine like maybe not like week to week traveling or like every single month, but in order to like perform your role properly, I imagine that like you need to do some traveling, and that might also be like for some people like a benefit of the role or like not if you're a person that likes to stay like rooted in a single place.
Yeah, I mean, Anna mentioned this earlier, right? Like different advocates approach advocacy differently, right? I'll use me as an example. I have 2 young kids at home. I don't like to be on the road, so I prefer to live stream when I can, right? There are some advocates who prefer to be in these spaces where they can be giving talks on a more regular basis. And so travel may include, hey, I'm gonna hop on a train and go to a location, do a thing, and then go back home. Or alternatively, it could be, I'm gonna hop on a plane, go do something at a conference. It varies based on like the season and the way in which you're doing your advocacy and the stories you wanna tell and those opportunities that present themselves.
I understand that there is no standard, let's say across 1 year on average. How important, how much time do you spend working with developer outside the company and developers inside the company? What would be your split? Approximately, of course.
I gotta think about what my answer to that would be. Because it's not 50-50.
Ideally, it would be 50-50, but it's not.
Yeah.
I think we work more internally, but we do try our best to be out in the community. But because of everything else that we have to do, we can't always be out in the community because we've got to like do all the other things that we have to do.
Why do you say ideally 50-50? I thought you. Why do you say ideally 50-50? Because I thought you want maybe ignorance on my part, but I thought as a developer advocate you would like your percentage with external developer to be a bit more. I don't know, maybe I'm completely wrong. Compared to internal. I mean, internal people already know you, but the one bringing value might be more external.
Well, I'm thinking about the product feedback piece here, right? So it's really good being out in the community, preaching and listening, but then if you don't do anything with that, then you're not doing anything with it. So that's why I say 50-50, because you also have to act and prepare. And
there's some of the, what I would call like I'm not going to call it the cheerleading, but it is kind of like cheerleading, which is you've done this thing in the community, you're bringing it back inside of the company, you've identified an opportunity, and sometimes you then have to go become the person to like drive that into creation. Hey, like one of the things I'm working on right now as an example is how do we build labs that developers can discover and play with to learn how to build with the product. It's a good thing that I spend that time on that for both the company and the developers, but that means it may take me out of the community for a stretch of time. It happens, unfortunately.
How valuable would you say that developer relations role is for like a single company? Maybe in addition to this question, do you think that there's supposed to be like a certain size of a company that the company needs to be in order to have like the developer relations role? Can you be like a startup and have like a developer relations role?
okay, Corey wants me to answer this one, so I'll answer this one. I'm biased. I'm obviously going to say that there should definitely be a developer relations team, but it depends on the company, right? If your company isn't aimed towards developers, then probably not. Fun fact that Auth0, when they started with only 15 people, when they got to 15 people, the 15th person was a developer advocate. So yes, it does make sense for some startups. Again, it depends on your target audience and all of those things. There's a lot that comes to it. It's not one size fits all. I think developer relations is very valuable in certain companies because we are actually gaining that incredible feedback that you all have around the product, around the service, and we can influence how the product is because of that feedback. And if you don't have someone actively doing that, well, you're just going to go with your gut feeling. And like we're all very opinionated being developers, and we all have our biases. And we'll probably just go down our path without having any sort of knowledge about what are the pain points. You're not going to know that if you're deep in the product. You need to go out into the field. You need to know what developers are building. You need to understand what they're building, how they build it, and what are the pain points so you can fix that.
We have another question.
Got two questions. Yeah, how does one become a developer, like a developer? I mean, is it because you grew up in the company and it kind of, you like it and you think, okay, or, well, basically, how?
Yeah, I think we should both answer this because I think we'll have similar but different answers. Thinking about my own journey into DevRel, my read on DevRel is you end up in this role by recognizing, one, that you have a passion for technology, two, that you have a degree of or desire to want to help others succeed, and then three is you have a degree of empathy around that process. And I think you need all three pieces. Yes, you could probably add more to this, but fundamentally, I think if you are really passionate about a particular thing or building a particular thing or the process of helping others in that way, I think you can very easily say, hey, this may actually be a really good fit for me. And a lot of people forget this, which is like, there are many people who do developer relations without being paid to do developer relations. It's not a bad thing. There's a lot of people who do this work now on a volunteer basis and end up growing the skill set needed to be successful in this role.
Yeah, I'm gonna talk I totally agree. I'm gonna talk a little bit about my journey. I did developer relations as a hobby. Like I was a developer advocate in my spare time. So I was a developer by day, developer advocate by evening. And the reason why I got into it was one, because I'm a self-taught developer and the community helped me a lot. So one, I wanted to give back to the community the things that I learned. And two, I didn't see a bunch of people who looked like me on stage. So I was like, let's go change. Let's change the system. And I had a daughter at the time. I have a daughter. And I wanted her to be able to do whatever she wanted to do too, right? So I wanted to be like a role model for her as well. So those were the three motivations. And when I started doing it, I really enjoyed teaching, being out in the community, learning from the community even more, giving back. And then one day I remember speaking to a developer advocate, and I was like, wait, what, you do this as a job? And that's why I got into developer advocacy, because it was my passion. I loved it. I did it as a hobby. And then I eventually did it professionally.
What about you, Corey? How did you get into this role?
In 2009, 2008 or 2009, I was at Microsoft, and I had the opportunity to rotate around the company, pretty much doing whatever I wanted for 2 years, which was interesting. And one of the gigs that I discovered was developer relations then. And I joined what was then called the, oh God, I can't remember what the acronym stands for, and I think Cliff probably knows. I'm just gonna call it the DPE team, but they were given the mission to get developers excited about all things developer products at Microsoft.
Developer product evangelist.
I thought it was that, but it's not that. But anyways, I had the chance to connect with, I had the target to connect with 5,000 academic developers or student developers in the Pacific Northwest over a 6-month period. And while I did not hit the 5,000, I was incredibly excited about the work. And then I left that job and I was like, okay, I never want to do DevRel again for a number of different reasons that I won't go into. So then I went and became an engineer, and then I went and became a consultant, and then I went and became a manager, and then I went back into engineering. And then I realized like the thing that I loved about like specifically the DevRel role was connecting with other people and seeing the light bulb moment. So like in my bio, anytime people ask for my bio, one of the first lines that's in there is like, I love sharing the magic of software, because I still think software is magical. I don't care what anyone says. A company reached out to me that said, hey, look, we think you'd be the right fit. And then I did that with Twilio for 5 years or 6 years. And then I joined Auth0 or Okta, which has been exciting.
So you've kind of touched on it already, but how do you identify a community that will drive impact? And then how do you then take that impact to the company and then parallel back out to the community? So say you take feedback, how do you then get that back out to the community and say, hey, we're taking your feedback in, we've worked on that project, now go play with it. How do you manage that within the communities?
I think it varies based upon how you show up in community. The way that I would answer that is, the first part is being active, right? So being in spaces like these, whether they're in person or virtual, and it's important to call that out, because what you don't want is the person who like shows up and is like, hey, just come use Auth0, and then they leave. Like that's disingenuous, right? But as they capture that feedback and they share with you, hey, I'm taking that feedback, I'm gonna take it back into the company, then as things happen, it's giving the regular updates in whatever that cadence needs to look like. And sometimes there's stuff that we can't talk about. It's just the nature of doing this for a company. But once there is an update, then there's a blog post, then there's a social post, then there's an immediate high touch sort of, hey, remember that thing we talked about? Look, we probably fixed it. Does this help your journey? It is about sort of just being active in community in that way.
But can you repeat the first question? Sorry.
Yep. How do you identify the communities that will then drive the impact? So how do you get there?
That is, okay, so it depends on the company again, right? It's the developer in me, it depends. So, for example, depending on what you want, what your product team wants to get out of everything, right? So for example, we track how many people use a certain SDK. And we might be launching a new SDK or something, and we know that we want to drive that impact. We have a really cool Vue SDK, just saying. No, I'm joking. But if we wanted to drive that, then we would need to define, okay, so this is a community that we want to get into. We want to get into the Vue community, for example. So what do? We look to see where the Vue community is biggest. Is it in your region? Is it in my region? What do we need to do? Is it like just in EMEA? Is it in one particular country? Do some experimentation and see how we're driving that impact within that specific region, within that specific framework. But we also have like plans around communities. So what does the Vue community like?
Yeah.
Not all communities behave the same.
Right.
So we need people who are specialized in those communities who can guide us and tell us like, no, this isn't going to work in that community, forget about it. We should definitely be going to conferences. We should be talking about this thing. We should be maybe doing a live demo. I don't know. It really depends on the community. And then we'll try different tactics and see what drives the biggest impact. But more or less, that's how we would go about it. But again, it depends on the company and the priorities of the company.
Yeah.
I imagine that like we might have some people, I'm interested in knowing like what might the interview for that position look like? I don't want to hear the answer, it depends.
No, that doesn't depend.
No. Yeah, there's now a set conversation on how we do this. There's a couple different things. One is, yes, there's conversations that you would typically expect to happen with folks who are like your hiring manager or maybe who would become your peers. And some of those conversations will assess different things about you as someone who wants to be an advocate. We talked about some of this before, sort of what's your technical credibility and how does that show up in how you show up in community spaces? What does it look like for you to collaborate with your peers to potentially get things done, or to do so in a way where you're either more self-driven or you need support in specific places, right? Like these are some of the things that we assess. There's the other aspect of this of just, okay, well, if you had to show up in a community space, like how would you tell a story, right? And oftentimes as developer advocates, we spend time telling stories through code and with code. And so what would that look like for you? And based on the seniority level of the role and what we're looking for from you as a successful candidate, we'll assess whether we think you're the right fit, but not all in a vacuum. Like there's a lot of people who are involved in this process. So that way we try to reduce bias and promote things around inclusivity and things of the such.
I imagine that most of the people here are like actually in developer roles. Have you seen like in real life that somebody just moves from a developer role to a developer advocate role, or like developer relation role? I mean, like not within the company. Actually, that might be two-part question. Like within the company, and then somebody who was in a developer role previously try to like get to a developer relations role.
It depends on the seniority of the position that you're looking for, right? So we have junior developer advocates up to architect developer advocates. So depending on what role is open and what type of person you're looking to fill the role, yes, it can be possible.
And there are times where you take a chance on a person just because you really do spot the passion inside of them to do this work. And so where they may need support in some areas, which is also one of the parts that like as a hiring manager, you're always trying to assess. It's like, okay, we're going to bring someone in. They're going to come with a certain skill set. They're going to need a certain type of support. How do we make sure we set them up for success? That's a thing.
I think that this is like a really good introduction for my next question, which is how do you actually measure success for this role? Like, what does it mean that like you are successful developer relations?
I love how our boss is walking out of the room.
Just walked out. This is one of those questions where it's like, hey, do you know what you're actually doing? Anyway, well, but to that point, I would tell you, this is one of the areas where a lot of DevRel folks don't always pay attention. And so it's a very common nomenclature, like to hear someone in DevRel say, like, you measure things? Interesting, because what do you measure? How do you measure?
It's a $1 million question in DevRel.
Yeah, for us, it is around, like if we're active in communities like this one, and if we're doing this in a global scale, well, what's the quality and quantity of like the reach that we have, right? So from a quantity perspective, how many folks are you talking to all up around the world, right? From a quality perspective, and what are the things we're hearing and learning, and how are we taking that and turning it into actionable things that can then create positive relationships with the company.
Do you think that like the roles that you have are more like collaborative roles, or you can actually make a difference between like two people on the same position and like same like seniority level, and like say this person is a bit better than this one, like this person is doing the job a bit better than this one? Or do you think like it might be a kind of a role that actually just requires you to like just spread the reach and make sure that like you represent your company in the best possible way, and then bring in like the new knowledge into the company that's like going to be used at some point in some way?
I hope it feels collaborative in this way, right? Like one thing, just as like general guidance, I'm going to talk about this through the DevRel lens, but it really applies to every role. What you do and the outcomes you drive matter. The more senior you get, how you do it matters probably even more. So my sense on this, and the way we've structured the team, I hope that this is working itself, it's showing itself to be true, is that folks are like proactively wanting to help their peers, because if their peers succeed and they succeed, everyone succeeds.
Yeah, I get it. And just to add on to that, like developer relations, like I said, you have to wear many hats, which means that you have to work with so many different teams. So if you're not working outside of your team, then you're not going to succeed and you're not going to grow. So you should be working with sales maybe, or with product, or with field marketing. There are so many different teams that we collaborate with on a day-to-day basis that, sorry, got distracted. But yes, you definitely need to collaborate, and not just within your team, but also outside of your team.
I know you have these Auth ambassadors, right? Do you get what is the percentage that Auth ambassadors become DevRels?
We don't have that many headcount. We don't have that much headcount. We don't have many roles open.
Yeah.
It depends. It really depends on the timing. The roles we have open, like right now across the whole team, we only have one role open, which is in Germany. And if we had ambassadors in Germany and they were interested, they would go through the interview loop just like everyone else.
For people to get into DevRel?
100%.
Yes.
100%, yeah.
I mean, if they succeed while being an ambassador at getting into all things DevRel, that's a win for us, because hopefully they would have had a positive enough relationship and gotten enough positive outcomes from their connection to the ambassador program that attribution will just create a really healthy relationship between them and the company. At the end of the day, if we don't have that, or if we lose that, especially if we lose it, like that's a problem. What we want is developers who like us, trust us, like use the platform enough that they then go share the love with their friends and their networks.
Who is it that you feel that you serve more, Auth0 or the developers that you advocate Auth0 to? And then I suppose a second question, is it hard to separate what you feel the product should do away from, how you should be guiding Auth0?
I tend to think, because I get paid by Okta, I probably serve Okta a bit more than the developers, right? My hope is that y'all don't hear that and think, man, this guy's just here shilling product, right? Like, I'm not doing that. But because of the fact that I'm compensated, I have an interest there. On the flip side, that doesn't mean that I'm in a position where I'm gonna be like, this isn't in a developer's best interests, and I'm still gonna go push this in front. Like, I would never do that. That's the worst way to do this work. I'll let you take the second question.
I mean, any of you to find yourself in a situation where you would actually have to choose like something that doesn't really align with the way how you think, if that makes sense? It doesn't have to be extreme, if you know what I mean.
It happens because we're not, right? Like, we don't all think the same. So it has happened where both here at Auth0 and when I was at Twilio, where things have come up where you're like, we should probably do that differently. The right way to engage in that is to go figure out how to do it differently, as opposed to like, we should probably do it differently, but I'm still gonna go talk about this in this way. Like, don't do that.
Yeah, and that answers his second question actually, which was what I was going to say. Like, I wouldn't go preach about a thing I don't believe in. It's just not in my best interest, and it's not going to be in your best interest because you're not going to believe me because I'm not going to be able to show up authentically.
Right.
So if I don't believe in it, let's go fix it before we have to go preach about it.
Right.
In terms of your contribution to code, what type of developers are you? Are you front end? Are you back end? Are you full stack? And also, are there times where your skill set may hold you back if you're not full stack? And then in terms of the dev rel, do you need to either be front end, back end, or full stack? Can you basically be anything?
I'm going to go with it depends. No, I'm joking.
It does.
It does. So on our team, we have people like Corey's .NET, I'm JavaScript, specifically Angular. We have people in Python, Java. What am I missing? Mobile,
Ruby, Java.
Ruby. It depends on the product. So Auth0 supports a wide range of technologies. So that's why we have advocates in so many different technologies. There are products that don't, that just support like front end, for example, or back end. So it really depends on the company and the product. But in our case, yeah, we have developers. We don't have any full stack.
I like to consider myself full stack.
And Peter's probably full stack. He's probably looking at me like, Anna, I'm so disappointed in you right now. Okay, sorry. But it depends. Like everyone, we like people who specialize because then they can really give stronger feedback, I like to think. But on our team, we have a bit of everything.
Getting into developer relations, how important do you think it is to have a personal brand, or how does your personal brand affect your job in developer relations?
I have a controversial answer. So if you have personal branding skills, I'll take that over the developer who has a personal brand if I had to make a choice. And it's a false choice in my head, right? But my controversial answer is the person who has the personal brand will care about the personal brand. That could become very difficult to manage. So I'm personally like, yeah, I don't mind that you have a personal brand. I'm just gonna be very mindful of like where your intentions really lie. And that may or may not work in your favor. Now that being said, it's not a blanket answer. Everyone's different. So you gotta be really careful not to like, oh, because you've got, like some people do the whole social media thing. You got like 50,000 followers, you know how to tweet. They're like, yes, you should come work for us. I'm not jumping over that. But I am jumping if you have 50,000 followers and the engagement that you drive is incredibly authentic, and it kind of serves the same things that we're looking for out of an advocate who we potentially hire.
Yeah, I'm more or less in alignment. I'm not saying that. So will I go look at your Twitter? Probably. Yeah. But not to see how many followers you have, just to see what you tweet about, what sort of person you are, what character you are. Are you a good fit for this team? I don't care about your followers. I don't even know how many followers I have. So what I want to see is that you're passionate about what you do. Yeah. So personal brand, I can take it or leave it. I don't really mind. But for me, what's important is to see that passion, that you're really invested in the community, showing up at in different events in the community, whether it's as an attendee, a speaker, or whatever. That's why I go to Twitter, to see what you're doing with the community.
Ooh, I only have one thing, which is I don't like selfish DevRel. And personal brand sometimes is a really easy way to find that. Selfish DevRel, what does that mean? If every time I see you, you're hawking product, but that product literally financially benefits you, I'm gonna be very cautious about you. Because again, you may not be someone who's the right fit to do DevRel in a team environment, let alone in a team environment in a company.
Right, cool. For the end of this talk, like, do you maybe have any closing remarks there?
Yeah, no, I just want to say thank you for having us.
Yes.
And if you're interested in learning more, feel free to speak to us now during the breaks. And if you're interested in developer relations and you feel like you're not checking all the checkboxes in the job role, whatever, just try.
Yeah.
There's no harm in trying.
Perfect. Thank you. And thank Auth0 and Okta.
Wait, I got one thing. We're hiring.
In Germany.
Yes. So if you all are interested or you know someone who's interested in a role for someone who's based out of Germany, please let us know. We can find ways to connect up dots so folks can get referred, all the things.